Hey everyone, it's Mr. Scott, and we're going to take a look at the AP Language and Composition Unit 4 FRQ. So first off, take a look at the prompt. If you notice, I color-coded it going along with the prompt advice, the background information, advice, and the task itself. Green is the background information, the advice is in light blue, the task is in red. So if you wish to pause to read the prompt, go for it. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. So, of course, the first thing to do is to read the speech. And after you've read the speech, you need to establish the rhetorical situation. And to do that, we're going to use SOAPs. First off, why do we need to establish the rhetorical situation? Well, it will allow you to offer a more complete analysis, again, answering the what, how, and why. I think if you just read the speech and pick out the rhetorical moves that they're using and just hone in on those without looking at the context of the speech, who the audience may be, or the purpose, you're not really doing a deep enough rhetorical analysis. You're just telling me essentially what tools he's using rather than looking at the speech and the rhetorical situation as a whole. So keep in mind, behind every rhetorical move that you notice, there is a purpose. And in your commentary, you have to explicitly connect the move back to the purpose, which we'll talk more about later. So now let's go ahead and break down the speech using the SOAPs format. Again, speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, and subject. First off, our speaker, President John F. Kennedy. The occasion, this was a speech at Rice University Stadium in Houston, Texas in 1962. But we can also look at the historical context because in this case, that's important. Again, that's that magical fourth ingredient when it comes to that rhetorical triangle that we went over a while ago. And this very much is important. What was going on around him at the time? Well, I mean, the space race in the 60s. Who is the audience? The American people. That's kind of I would say, the obvious one. To get a little more focused, it would also be American people who are doubtful about spending tax dollars on NASA. Maybe they're doubtful about the risk that the space race poses. Maybe people who are just unaware that it's important. And then, of course, the immediate audience, those present at the stadium. But those aren't, that audience isn't why he wrote the message. So technically, they're a part of it. And I don't want to say that they don't need to be acknowledged, but it is relatively negligible because if you look at the context of the speech, he is speaking to a much broader audience. So what's the purpose? He needs the support of the public to launch a manned moon mission. Um, and that should probably sound familiar since we studied a similar speech back in the fall. And then the subject, and this is your main idea and context. That is, the pace at which mankind advances has increased exponentially, and if the United States, whose history of trailblazing is known, is not leading the charge through space exploration, it will be left to someone else, someone whose mission perhaps could threaten the world. I know that's a lot, but the subject, um, I wanted to include as much as I could from what I read in there, just because the more thorough a subject you have, um, the more it points to the purpose, I think. So even though SOAPs has you identifying purpose ahead of time, the subject and the context of the speech, the main idea, what he's getting at, can help illuminate not just the main purpose, but your lesser, perhaps say, supporting purposes, which we'll talk about those in a little bit. All right, so once SOAPs is established, setting up the thesis and the rest of your essay is relatively easy because now you have a more complete picture about what's going on. The only thing left to do is to hone in on the rhetorical tactics that are being used. I wrote a thesis statement, again, thesis statements. I wrote two, just to go back to the idea that you don't have to write one sentence for a thesis. It can be multiple sentences. And I'll give you a moment to read that. Go ahead and pause so you can read the thesis I came up with. after which I will go ahead and move on. And just to note again, this is the thesis that I wrote. This is not the absolute answer. There are multiple approaches that you can have to your thesis for rhetorical analysis. So notice that I used an open thesis. I just talked about him appealing to the sense of patriotism rather than using a closed one that lists the rhetorical tools that I plan to examine. Both are acceptable. Um, and here are, I suppose, the positives of both. An open thesis makes for a better flow in writing. This is not always the case, but in some cases like this one, it is very much applicable. Um, and then a closed thesis is more focused. It allows the writer to stay on track. You establish where the paper is going to go, and it's a roadmap for the reader, but it's also a roadmap for the writer. The only issue that sometimes people have with the closed thesis is they'll list what their lesser claims or their main points or their topics are going to be in that closed thesis, and then they forget one. And so they introduce an idea and then they never extrapolate on it. So let's look at supporting evidence and commentary. One issue that I saw with FRQ was the lack of explicitly connecting the rhetorical moves to the purpose. There was a lot of what going on, and somehow saying, the what being what tools being used, or what evidence from the speech shows this, and how that evidence is used as rhetoric. But it doesn't go really into the why Kennedy was using that. So this is what I saw. People would have quoted evidence. They would have an explanation of the tool being used, whether it was a flashback, whether it was a pathetic appeal to patriotism, you name it. And then it went to a general statement stating that the tool was used to achieve a purpose. So there would be quoted evidence and then explanation saying that Kennedy is appealing to patriotism, and then saying his appeal to patriotism was done to get people to support the space race. Okay, you're missing a link in that chain. How does the appeal to patriotism connect to getting people to support the space race? Well, you could say he positioned the space race as something that is important for America to continue its role in leadership, and any good patriotic American would want America's world position as a leader to be maintained. So therefore, supporting the space race would support America's position of power. That's just, I'm connecting those dots. You can't just you can't just put it out there and say, here's what he's doing, here's this rhetorical tool, and then you're not telling me how or why it supports the purpose. You're just saying that it does support the purpose. You're not going further into it. So the reader is doing the work. Remember, the writer does all the work. The reader it should be very clear to the reader. The reader should only have to read it and understand what you're saying. So if you're missing those links in the chain, for every link that you don't make, the reader is having to put that in there. And you don't know if the reader is going to establish that link the way you want them to. So control what you're saying. Control your argument. Don't leave any room for doubt or any room for misinterpretation. So let's go ahead and talk about major purpose and lesser purposes, like I mentioned earlier. One way to approach your supporting paragraphs, is to identify lesser purposes. And it's helpful to think of your lesser purposes almost like lesser claims in an argumentative piece. You have your major claim, and then each paragraph introduces a lesser claim that supports that major claim. And so much like that, you can have a lesser purpose supporting a major purpose. So major purpose for Kennedy, gaining public support for NASA to continue the space mission. All right, that's the big goal of this thing. One of the lesser purposes could be to persuade his audience that supporting space exploration is patriotic. He's trying to do that. He's trying to make that connection. Okay, how is he doing that then? So now the lesser purpose, him trying to persuade his audience that supporting space exploration is patriotic, is what you can connect the evidence to. And so, if it helps, let's look at let's connect an argumentative essay format to that of a rhetorical analysis for those that may still be struggling. I will say this though, I didn't see a lot of people struggling with this FRQ. You guys are doing pretty well with your rhetorical analyses. Once we broke out of the argumentative essay format, because a lot of people were still instead of analyzing the rhetoric, we're just kind of commenting on the argument that was being given, saying whether or not you believed it or didn't believe it. So you don't want to fall into that trap. But for those of you that are still pretty familiar with how we structured our argumentative essays, this may help. So you have an argumentative essay, you've got a rhetorical analysis. So for each supporting paragraph in an argumentative essay, you have to have a lesser claim. Well, same with the rhetorical analysis, go for a lesser purpose. The smaller purpose that the larger purpose is supported by. You have evidence in an argumentative essay, either quoted or paraphrased. For a rhetorical analysis, it's a good idea to go with quoted evidence, just because you can't, there's no question there. If you have the quote, you pull it directly from there. You're using his words, you're analyzing his words, you're not, paraphrasing, because then if you paraphrase, there's often room for misinterpretation. So go with quoted evidence on a rhetorical analysis. In an argumentative essay, you have commentary, where you explain the evidence. You explain it, you talk about its relevance, you tell me what's going on, what it's about. Sometimes that's 2 sentences where you essentially break it down, but then you say why it's relevant. The commentary for the rhetorical analysis, we begin with identifying the move. All right, what is being done? This is the how. What is he doing? If you don't know the rhetorical tool, you don't know the exact name for it, that's never a problem. Describe what he's doing. Describe it the best way you can. Even if you don't know the name of something, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that you're going to score any less for not knowing the word. Next up on the argumentative essay, you have commentary, where you connect the evidence to the lesser claim. And on the rhetorical analysis, it's pretty much the same thing. You're connecting that rhetorical move to the lesser purpose. You've identified it, you've explained it, now you connect it to the lesser purpose, which is the statement you would have opened with, and that's the why. And then finally, in an argumentative essay, you're connecting the lesser claim to the major claim. In the rhetorical analysis, you're connecting that lesser purpose to the major purpose. So hopefully you see there's a logic to this. It's very logical the way that this follows. You establish lesser purpose, introduce the evidence, tell me how the evidence fulfills a rhetorical, identify the move that's going on, showing that you understand what they're doing. You're connecting that move to how it serves the lesser purpose, and then you connect the lesser purpose back to the major purpose in your thesis statement. So that's all I have right now. Email me with questions, and have a good day.